Bromsgrove in Worcestershire is a little overshadowed by the sprawl of Birmingham, 15 miles to the north. Yet there's been a community here since King Alfred fortified it against the Danes around 900 AD. The Worcester to Birmingham Canal flows nearby with its famous 30-lock Towderbig section, the longest flight of narrow locks in the country, rising more than 200 feet. The railway too brought prosperity to 19th century Bromsgrove, and not a little drama. The Lickey incline here has the steepest mainline gradient in Britain. Extra engines were kept to help push faltering locomotives up the hill, but one of them blew up, killing 2 railwaymen. The impact on the town can be seen in the memorial stones they were given. Bromsgrove would not forget. So how should history be kept alive? There's the regular guided tour by local historian Alan Richards.
The salt track, which was there long before the Romans came. What I want to direct your attention to now is not so much the church, but the ring of trees around it. This is a very interesting ring of trees. There were 62 trees planted in the year 1792, so these are pretty well 200 years old now, and they're all lime trees. We do know that they were planted on the site, really, of an earlier circle of trees. I suspect this really was a sacred grove. The name Bromsgrove itself would seem to indicate this, although the name Bromsgrove was also Bremsgrave or Bromsgrave at the time of the Domesday Book.
And correcting historical myths is important, like the belief that the poet A.E. Houseman was a Shropshire lad. Perish the thought.
And this is Perry Hall, which is now a hotel. And Perry Hall, of course, was the home of Alfred Houseman, the poet, and Lawrence Houseman, his brother. There was a very ancient Perry Hall here long before this present one. The windows, of course, are, I think, the glory of Perry Hall, those lovely Gothic windows which date from the rebuilding of the house in 1824.
And then there's the let's dress up and play games school of keeping history alive. The court leet was the forerunner of local government, whose job was to regulate the affairs of the town's trade. But nowadays, it's a purely ceremonial body.
Would you please form up in the following order? The police are here, yes, the band are here. The head butter will be next, but will not be taking his place in the parade as yet. And then the bailiff's pallbearer and the bailiff. Please leave a space then immediately behind the band. Could we please have the Reeves pallbearer?
The top hats and flowing robes are in celebration of a royal charter granted by King John in 1199, which allowed Bromsgrove to hold a fair each year on the feast of St. John the Baptist, the town's patron saint.
Eldermen, I'm sorry, sir. The bread way up, ale tasters, and the satchel and seal of leather.
You need the stentorian voice, don't you? A really good, beaming, booming
The best bloke
voice.
we would have would be Amphlett for the day.
Well, yeah.
Parade, attention! By the left, quick march!
The court leet is undoubtedly great fun for participants and spectators alike, a high spot in the town's calendar. But they wouldn't always have been so welcome, these inspectors from medieval departments of trade and industry. And there's another side to Bromsgrove's history which gives little scope for civic pride and in which pageant plays no part at all.
I brought you up here to show you one of the few remaining nailers' cottages left in Bromsgrove. The nailers of Bromsgrove, of course, made nails in their own homes, or at least in these outhouses, usually built onto the side of the house. Inside one of those little nail shops, as they were called, there might be 2 or 3 blocks in which 2 or 3 members of the family would be busy making nails. They bought the iron rods from ironmongers in the town. When they'd made the nails, thousands of them, they had to wheel them in barrows back to the ironmongers to sell them there. And of course the secret of why Bromsgrove was able to make so many nails is that just less than 20 miles away you got the great iron mines and coal mines of the Black Country. That's where they got their coal and iron from, across Romsley Hill.
The nearby Avencroft Museum also offers guided tours. But here there's no gentle glossing over the awful conditions of a nailer's life, because while the museum's principal function is to restore buildings, it also aims to recreate the life inside them. This group of students are among 20,000 every year who come to listen to lecturers like Adrian Durkin.
Cradley was always important for its chain making. Chain making was usually carried on in small factories like this one, whereas Bromsgrove was notorious for its nail making. Nail makers usually living in very bad conditions. It was more or less a cottage industry, and so each little cottage in Bromsgrove would have a small building like this behind it, and this consists of a small forge, which is usually called an odd work forge, because that was where quite literally odd jobs like making bucket handles or hooks was undertaken. In the centre is the brewhouse, which is partly for heating up water for washing and partly for brewing beer, and the end segment was actually for the making of nails themselves.
Methods of ironworking remained the same for centuries, whether in beating out medieval swords or 19th century nails. The trade is recorded in Bromsgrove as far back as 1381 and died out only after the First World War. Bill Kings is himself the grandson of a nailer.
These nails are Roman nails that were made approximately 2,000 years ago. And if one looks at the smaller ones here, they are almost identical to local rosehead nails that were made about 80 years ago.
Hardly any difference?
Hardly any difference at all. And these were made by the thousand locally, as were also we had very, very small, complicated nails made entirely in Bromsgrove. And if one looks at that one, about 32 blows were required to make that, and they were made entirely by hand. This one similarly required 25 blows to make the tang or point, and that was an 11-penny nail. Now that is 11pence in old money, and the nail makers were paid 11pence for making 1,000 of these, so one can see why in 1809, during the bread riots, one Bromsgrove nailer made a statement that he had made 3,000 nails that day, involving him striking iron with the hammer no less than 70,000 times. At that particular time, it was estimated that in Bromsgrove alone, 2,600 million nails were made by hand.
From what we can see from about sort of 1850 onwards, he would need to be earning 20 shillings a week to keep a family, something like that. And in many cases, it would be difficult to earn even half of that. So these people had to have their wives working, had to have their children working, even their quite young children working, to even make a reasonable living, and the standard of living was extremely poor. We've got information which suggests that some people even managed to starve to death.
In 1841, the nail masters, at a meeting at the Midland Hotel in Birmingham, decided to reduce the price of all nails across the board by 20%. The nail makers, in retaliation, convened a meeting at Topchurch, Dudley, and nail makers from all over the Midlands descended on Dudley. 2,500 men, women and children walked from Bromsgrove to Dudley to attend this meeting. As a result of this, the bait or abatement of wages then became a household word in the nail trade. And from 1841, after the 16-week strike, there was a series of baits and strikes and baits and strikes until 1869.
The nail masters usually had a good supply of nails, and in some cases it's been suggested they actually encouraged the nail makers to go on strike because they'd got too many of a certain sort of nail and didn't want to pay out any more money to the nail makers, so they cut the prices, the nail makers went on strike, and this suited the nail master just right, because by the time they needed a new supply of nails, they'd got the working force just where they wanted it.
The children from the age of 3 onwards were always classified as nail makers, and one only has to read through the censuses from 1801 onwards to find the extent to which children were exploited in the nail trade. In fact, in the 1841 census, we find that 95 boys under the age of 5 were actually employed as nail makers in the Worcestershire area. There were 69 girls under the age of 5 actually registered in the censuses as being nail makers. There are no similar conditions anywhere in this country to those that existed in the nail trade.
The courtleet, complete with reeves, pole-bearer, searcher and sealer of leather, breadwares and tithing men, are about to get down to the serious business of the day. Have you ever noticed how, in matters historical, ale seems to play a prominent part?
Mr. Bailiff, Mr. Smith, landlord of this hostelry, who has brought a sample of ale for you to taste, sir.
Mr. Smith, sir, thank you very much. Right. Looks as though it's got a good head on it. Mr. Ale Taster. Right.
These, Mr. Smith, are the ale tasters.
Mr. Deputy Ale Taster, will you come and officiate, please?
It's a very important point of protocol that while there need be only 1 bailiff, 1 reeve and 1 marshal, 2 ale tasters are required, in case one should be taken ill in the course of his duties, a hazardous task being an ale taster.
Mr. Ale Taster, what are your findings on this drop of ale from the Red Lion?
A tawny wine, sir, with a little head to it, a good body. In fact, a round body as the marshal's belly, I think one might say.
I can see 1 or 2 thirsty eldermen over here.
The original purpose of the court was an assize, not in the modern sense of a court where people are tried on criminal charges, but a trial of the quality of goods on sale in the town, principally leather, bread and ale. Only if these didn't meet with approval were the offending tradesmen hauled up to answer before the court.
Ho yay! Ho yay! Ho yay! All good people of Bromsgrove, do now and give your diligent attention. Ho yay! Ho yay! Ho yay!
Be it known to you all, in the first year of the reign of King John, and in the year of our Lord 1199, His late Majesty granted to Hugh de Bard a charter that he might hold a fair in the town of Bromsgrove each year on the feast of St. John the Baptist, who is the patron saint of this parish, which feast day falls upon the 24th of June. Now, therefore, this ancient charter, guarding well the rights and privileges of this parish and manor, have commanded me, their bailiff, to make proclamation and claim of this ancient charter, and to charge you, the townsfolk of this parish, to mark it well and abuse not its privileges. God save the Queen.
God save the Queen!
Will you therefore deliver your report to the good townsfolk of Bromsgrove?
Mr. Bailiff, I will. My deputy has already supped too much and is horizontal. Which shows how good this stuff is. I have sampled this, Mr. Bailiff, from mine host, Mr. Smith, of the Red Lion, and I can tell you it is a tawny colour, a nutty flavour. It has a good head. But, Mr. Bailiff, it contains hops. Now, Hugh de Bard, you will recall, in the 11th century, had never heard of hops. Hops did not come into this country until the 1520s. And so this is a new product. Not a bad product, but it is new. What you do is you take this stuff and you pour it on the wooden seat and then you sit on it. And you sit on it for half an hour. And at the end of the half an hour, when you stand up, if you tear your breeches, there's too much sugar in it. And you downgrade it because it's no damn good and you get a new pair of trousers. I'm not going to sit on it for half an hour, Mr. Bailiff, you'd hoof me off. But I do point this out. This is a quality control method of the ancient time, And it is very similar to working as ale tasting. It's very similar as working for the health service. It's rather like wetting yourself in dark trousers. You get a nice warm feeling, but nobody notices. Mr. Bailiff, you're astonishingly good health.
Thank you, Mr. Ale Taster.
Well, now we're getting behind some of the buildings in the High Street, and here's one of the oldest sandstone houses now left in the town. There used to be many sandstone houses because of all the quarries in the area. This is one of the last of them, but basically a lot of that house is 300 years old, and there's even a timber frame passage running through it. But the front of the house has been bricked up in the 19th century, encased with brick, so from the front it looks like a Victorian building. And this is true of so many buildings in the High Street in Bromsgrove. They've been cased up in the 19th century. Much older sandstone or timber frame houses lie underneath. Next door to it is the Golden Lion coach house. It's only recently closed down after 200 years as an inn. And the Golden Lion was the last evidence in the town of the strong connection between the Talbot family of Grafton Manor, one of the most important families in the country for centuries, and the town itself. Right, the building ahead of us is the building which I think is the ugliest building now in Bromsgrove. It was built by the Bromsgrove Guild. This was a company of craftsmen who turned out some very beautiful things in Bromsgrove. The most famous of these were the Buckingham Palace gates. An elderly inhabitant of Bromsgrove actually remembers these being carried down the hill to be transported down to London. They produced lift gates for the Lusitania and the Titanic. All kinds of cities have been beautified by these ugly buildings really on this hill. On the left, that great building with the corrugated iron reaching such a height, dominating the landscape from the other side of Bromsgrove, this was built on, so I'm told, to house the liver birds, which the Bromsgrove Guild also built in the early part of this century. The liver birds were so big, it needed that extra kind of shed to house them.
Ho yay, ho yay! The bailiff will now introduce the competition for the town crier.
Members of the court, I have the pleasure of welcoming the high and low bailiffs of the court leets of Ulster and Henley in Arden, who have travelled far this day to celebrate with us the fair and feast of St. John. They are accompanied by their town criers, who I understand bring greetings to this town.
Ho-yay! 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 As chairman of the ancient and honourable Guild of Town Criers, I am pleased to take part in the restoration of this ancient office of Town Crier here in Bromsgrove. God save the Queen!
Well, that's how it's supposed to be done. Now it's the turn of the aspiring amateurs. Looking unimpressed in the background is A.E. Houseman, whose opinion of town criers is not recorded, but whose expression may give you a hint.
From the bailiff and jurymen of Bromsgrove's ancient court leet. From the bailiff and jurymen of Bromsgrove's ancient court leet. Greetings to Christopher Howard Bird, Esquire, Lord of the Manor.
Greetings to Christopher Howard Bird, Esquire, Lord of the Manor, and to Mrs. Joy Bushby, Chairman of the Council.
The court charges all the good people of this manor to use the town well and to patronise the honest traders who offer their wares in this fair high street. And to patronise the honest traders who offer their wares in this fair town. All those who use it are warned under peril of being unearthed to keep it free from
But if Bromsgrove's history were to be told through a building, it would be through Grafton Manor. It was given first to William the Conqueror's nephew, and succeeding lords of the manor were close to the affairs of state for centuries. Yet the present owner, John Morris, found it deserted and almost forgotten in 1945.
I remember seeing an advertisement in the Birmingham Post, a large photograph on the front of the post, and there was Grafton Manor, and it was for sale at £15,000 or to let on a long lease. Well, £15,000 for us at that time was far too much. I mean, it was astronomical, and it wasn't a realistic figure at all. But we came to see it, and I remember seeing the front lawn a foot high. The grass was waving, and my mother instantly fell in love with it, and she took it on a long lease.
After running it for some years as a nursing home, the Morrises did buy it and turned it into a hotel. Passengers on the QE2 or the supersonic elite on Concorde receive a booklet pointing them gently in the direction of the manor via an association called Pride of Britain. The cost of refurbishing and maintaining the manor is considerable and depends on attracting the better-heeled kind of guest.
We joined Pride of Britain, which is a collection of 26 small country house hotels. They're all proprietor run, just as we are, with a family, very small and very exclusive. This is marketed throughout America, in fact throughout the world.
John Morris won't be satisfied, however, until Grafton Manor is authentically restored.
On the West Terrace, which is a beautiful Elizabethan wall, a lot of windows were put in that were really literally found in the field. 30 steel windows, old sash windows, terrible things. And we're slowly eradicating all these now by going back to the original mullion frames, which are still there, fortunately. But now we're taking them back to the original stone cheeks and headers and putting new mullions in and putting it back. In fact, when the last window is completed on the West Terrace on the first floor, the top of the manor then will be back to as it was in 1567.
Isn't salt, it's sugar.
The court-leet has departed, duly satisfied, and an Elizabethan fair is now in full swing. You don't have to be grand, like the bailiff, the jurors, or even the tithing men in lounge suits and robes, to join in this part of the proceedings. Everybody's welcome, in costume or out, although some of the skills on display here are now quite historic in themselves.
Give me your hand.
They call this sex food from where we come.
Where'd you come from?
The Morris dancing is taking place not only outside the appropriate premises, but under the watchful gaze of A.E. Houseman. His statue rather dominates the high street, but not everybody approved of the decision to put it there in the first place.
And I said, well, I can't say much about Houseman because he was just spent a fleeting glimpse of Bromsgrove, that's all. But I did ask them who they would prefer to see on the statue, and one old boy pulled me on one side and he mentioned the name of a lady of easy virtue, and he said she should be up there. Now there's a lot of truth in what he said, because the lady of easy virtue did a tremendous social need for people who had to lead the type of existence that the Bromsgrove nailers did.
Why was that?
Well, just imagine if you'd been born a woman, from the time that you were able to conceive, you'd have a child, and then immediately you'd be caught again, so that a woman's life was absolutely diabolical.
Meanwhile, exit the Morris dancers and enter the new town crier, who's now been selected and is about to make his debut, under Houseman's gaze, of course.
We were looking particularly for three things. We were looking for volume, of course. You can't have a town crier that nobody can hear. But almost as important as volume is clarity.
Oh, yes! Oh, yes! Oh, yes! Greetings from Bromsgrove's newly elected bellman. On Saturday next...
You want a town crier, hopefully that the people of Bromsgrove are going to be proud about. So we look for style and presentation. Somebody who can just give us that little bit of something extra, who can give a little flourish with the bell, who can look good and can carry it off. Isn't going to be embarrassed by somebody playing the fool or whatever else. Gives it a bit of panache, shall we say.
And to go to the gala in Saunders Park, where there will be helicopter rides, motorcycling for children, and much more for your delight.
While the traders at least tried to maintain a historical theme with their Elizabethan fare, the court leet has now wound up, still in full regalia, in possibly the least historic setting in Bromsgrove.
We were going to have the town crier competition here, but you can imagine they wouldn't have been allowed at
all. Just a little faster riding.
But regardless of festivals, courts, leet or fairs, there's one group of people you'll find here every Saturday. The meat traders. The patter may be adapted for the occasion, but the game's the same.
Medieval prices, girls. Well, give me the weight today. We promised you a bargain, and my God, you're getting a bargain. £5 again. Wakey, wakey, for goodness sake. Over there, let's do it again. We're going to start whopping them in here now. Look at all these lamb chops, girls. We're talking quality and we're talking charity here. £3 again. Does anybody want that for £3?